and by thee be happily ended, through Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you, members. And good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our guests in the gallery. I now take leaders' questions under Standing Order 38. Deputy MaryLouMcDonald.
Taoiseach, there is huge public shock and anger regarding the reported sexual assault of a 10-year-old girl on the grounds of City West iPass Centre here in Dublin. A man in his 20s has been charged in connection with the assault, and I think An Garda Síochána are to be commended for their work in making this arrest. Of course, our first concern is for the welfare of this young child. Tusla has confirmed that this child was in their care. This vulnerable 10-year-old girl went missing from Tusla care while on a supervised trip to Dublin city centre. She was then reported missing to An Garda Síochána. She remained missing overnight and she was then reportedly sexually assaulted. Taoiseach, how could a 10-year-old in the care of Tusla go missing on a supervised trip? There is a disturbing pattern of children in the care of the state and of this agency being failed catastrophically. We think of 6-year-old Kyron Dernan, missing and presumed dead. 3-year-old Daniel Arubose, whose skeletal remains were found in Donabate last month. And of course, 17-year-old Vadkim Davidenko, who was stabbed to death at a Tusla care facility in North Dublin only last week. It really begs the question, what on earth is going on with Tusla? Why is this happening again and again? How is it that in our small country, so many children can go missing? Our thoughts today are with this 10-year-old girl who has been so failed and violated, and with her family. Our thoughts are with all of the children that I have mentioned and with their families. They have experienced unimaginable loss, hurt and trauma. Taoiseach, it's also reported that the man now charged with this assault was subject to a deportation order issued in March of this year. Can I ask how it is that a person issued with the deportation order remains in the country 6 months later? People are now asking how this was allowed to happen, why the order wasn't enforced, and did the authorities know that he was still in the state? You see, this violent incident deeply unnerves the entire community, in particular the local community in Sogart and the surrounding areas, whose pleas for additional resources, including Garda resources, have been ignored. And they now feel very betrayed and very badly let down. Tá imní olmhór im ascan phobal tar éis ionsaí gnéasach líomhnatha Colleen Demlian Adísh ag Unad iPass City West. Tá ceisneanna trom cúiseacha le ragardinis ag Tusla agus ag an rialtas. The safety and protection of our children must be the first and highest concern for all of us in this House. Children in the care of the state are the most vulnerable of all, and yet they have been failed far too often and nobody held to account. This demands an immediate and a strong response from government. Taoiseach, it is important that you provide as much information as you can today without, of course, compromising the legal process. Can I ask you, what action will be taken to hold Tusla to account for this 10-year-old child going missing from their care? And can you please explain to people how the alleged perpetrator is still here 6 months after being issued with a deportation order?
To respond.
Could I first of all say that the events of last evening were extremely serious and very, very grave. And our thoughts are, as the Deputy has quite rightly said, with the well-being and welfare of the child involved and the entire family. And could I say it is the fundamental duty of the state to protect the children of the state. And irrespective of the complexity, acuity or severity of any particular case, that duty has to be fulfilled. And on this occasion, that duty was not fulfilled. And there will be, this case will be referred to the National Review Panel. Legislation will be introduced to put that review panel on a statutory basis, but the more fundamental point is that a review will take place, and the Minister for Children has asked for an interim report, certainly within 6 weeks. The situation pertaining, and I do have to be careful in terms of there's a live criminal case, a person has been arrested in respect of the alleged sexual assault of this 10-year-old girl. So I don't want to say anything that in any way compromises the conduct or the progressing of that case. But the Minister for Justice has asked his Secretary-General and has asked the Department of Justice for a full report in respect of the management of this, of the application for asylum case since the person first arrived into the country. And there are issues there that certainly need review more generally. And I would acknowledge the concern, anger and worry of many people throughout the country at what has transpired here or alleged to have transpired here. And the concerns are legitimate and the concerns of people generally across the country and within the specific location are genuine, and I want to acknowledge that. And we will put the full rigours of the state behind this case in all facets and all respects. And also, there are issues, and I don't want to conflate this with other cases. I don't think that's fair. So the other cases are equally very, very difficult and grave. We do have, for example, and this has nothing at all to do with the case last evening, but you mentioned North Dublin last week. The numbers of unaccompanied minors presenting is increasing at a very rapid level. And Tusla, those young people were not in the care of Tusla. They were actually being provided with housing, essentially an emergency accommodation. So that's an important context in that case. So we shouldn't conflate all the cases because there are different backgrounds to each case. But the state has a fundamental right to protect the well-being of a 10-year-old child. And I would like the review to look at aspects of the care of the child in question, and also to bring forward recommendations, because we do need to challenge existing restrictions or potential restraints on care agencies as well in terms of looking after young children. It's a particularly complex area, so it will be fully reviewed, and the National Review Panel is independent of Tusla, and I think that's important, and we do need an interim report as quickly as possible. Agus adabhíam gwil imni file huini agus pobl na tíre fin méad atá tar éis tarlú, agus támid chun gachaí an cordis taíocht a chóirt an lenamh atá gceist an seo, agus de chlán an linamh, agus mar aon le sin tuarascála áilt ón na hairí agus ón na ringe speisialte.
Thank you. Deputy MacDonald.
So I suppose for any parent or anybody with the care of a child, your worst, or certainly one of your worst imaginable nightmares is that they go missing or that they are assaulted, particularly in this way. And it is, as you say, Taoiseach, not surprising at all that this case has caused deep and profound anger and unease. I do appreciate that you are recognising that there has been a failure of the system in this case. I think that is a necessary acknowledgement. However, there is also a pattern, and a disturbing pattern, that has emerged. And I think this requires actually more Taoiseach than simply referral to a panel. I think there has to be more action, because The most unnerving thing is that this happens to children in the care of or provided accommodation by or known to TUSLA and the state, and yet again and again we hear these unimaginable tales. And the second theme, Taoiseach, if I might, is this: there has to be confidence in the system of application for asylum and in our immigration system. And any question mark around a person overstaying in the state when a deportation order has been made, again, is deeply unnerving and deeply, deeply unhelpful, and has to be addressed by the government.
First of all, I would agree that there needs to be not just a specific review into this case, but we're not ruling out a wider review of all aspects of how we protect children. And we use language like children in care. That's a formal legal sense where a child is in care, but this child would not necessarily have been statutorily in care because there's an age limit in terms of that. So, and these are important points, because the Act is very clear in terms of the age at which a child is formally put into care. And I think all of these issues do need to be reviewed. And they're quite complex and they're important issues, and I think legislation governing this needs to be reviewed as well. So to give the maximum, and again, I don't want to preempt anything here because there's a review going to take place, but my own initial sense is that the agencies and authorities do need maximum flexibility within the legal frameworks to do the right thing, what's right for the child at a given time. Clearly there has been failure here. In terms of the state's obligation to protect this child.
Thanks, Taoiseach.
And on the execution of deportation orders, that very much depends on the country involved, or the potential country involved, or the country alleged to be involved in terms of country of origin, being in a position to receive a person. There can be a variety of reasons why that's not possible.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Ivana Bacik.
Mahgood Khan Corlin. First, our thoughts are with the young 10-year-old girl in the care of TUSLA who has been the subject of an assault, and indeed our thoughts are with the family of young Vadim Davydenko, who was killed last week in Dublin. And I'm conscious, Taoiseach, that criminal proceedings are underway in respect of both incidents, and indeed I want to commend the Garda and wish them well with their investigations, and don't propose to say anything more about either case at this point. Taoiseach, the Irish Times reports today that ordinary festive staples will cost 20% more this Christmas than they did last year. The cost of groceries is increasing at roughly 3 times the headline rate of price inflation, a shocking development. And Taoiseach, this is having a severe impact on working families, families who are hard-pressed, who got so little relief in your recent budget, families who've had the small support of one-off payments taken off them this year, while their housing costs are going up, their fuel bills are going up, and they're struggling to make ends meet. It's not just the Christmas turkey that will cost more this year. Rents are 7% higher now than they were a year ago. More than 300,000 households are in arrears on their electricity bills, bills that continue to rise as temperatures drop. And these factors are conspiring together to force tens of thousands of families across the country to make impossible choices, like the choice between heating and eating, Taoiseach. Your finance bill will be debated this afternoon. It will give effect to your budget, a budget that we in Labour have characterised as being for burger barons and big builders. Due to your failure to index tax bands in this budget, those earning €50,000 per year can now expect to pay an additional €1,000 a year in tax. And they'll have nothing to show for that in terms of investment in basic infrastructure, in public services, in housing or in public goods. And they're getting hammered at the tills. I heard from a woman in my own community yesterday. She has 2 masters. She works what could be described as a good job, but she's renting and she's paying whopping rent for her home. She cannot afford, Taoiseach, to cover her household bills or her grocery bills. And she told me it makes her feel ashamed. And that is the legacy of your government's budget and your government's financial policies. People around the country feeling ashamed because they cannot stay afloat financially due to lack of supports from the state. people who are often referred to in a cliche as the squeezed middle, Taoiseach. So what do you propose to do for hard-working families? You repeatedly answer my questions on the cost of living crisis by mentioning the terrible war in Ukraine, which of course is a factor, geopolitical uncertainty, market forces, but corporate greed is also an issue. And I would ask that you would take on my colleague Jed Nash's excessive prices bill, which you supported at second stage. It would force supermarket giants to publish their profits and would bring about price transparency, thereby driving down the price of a weekly shop. You could also, Taoiseach, direct the new agri-food regulator to investigate why food prices are getting so high. These are constructive steps we in Labour are proposing. Will you adopt these steps, Taoiseach, to cut the cost of living for families?
Could I first of all say that I think the CSO should be the standard statistical body that we should adhere, any analysis and comment and pin it on, because there's all sorts of various groups coming forward every now and again within determine it. But there's no question but that inflation has been a very significant issue over the last number of years. In fact, it was close to 10% following the pandemic and the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It has eased considerably since then, but of course the prices are at that elevated level, and real wages are now are increasing by about 3.5% if you take out inflation. So, but that said, food prices are significant pressure on many families. But the government has responded, Deputy, and we've put in permanent measures that have eased the cost of living of many families. Free school books, for example, was a very significant measure we took, which is permanent. Hot school meals, free hot school meals in schools, very significant. 26% of families now benefit from the fuel allowance. That's a very significant enhancement. We targeted reports. The child support payment, if you're over 12 years of age, went up to €16, by €16, and under 12 by €8. And that helps many lower income families, but many middle class households will also benefit with children. And the working family threshold, family payment threshold increased by €60 a week, which allows more families to qualify and get more support. And there was an expansion of the back to school clothing and footwear payment to include younger children, 2 to 3 year olds. And of course, we have the pension auto enrolment scheme, which I think is a very significant scheme which will benefit up to well over 700,000 workers in time. Now, these are more permanent, sustainable measures that will improve working people's lives and quality of lives into the future. And so we did target our resources in this budget. We also extended the rent tax credit, which has been increased over recent years. We've extended the reduction in the VAT rates in terms of electricity and kept it at 9% for the next number of years. We will continue to do what we can in terms of supporting families. And the budget is not as you have described. That's just a cheap headline grabber. But the budget is very significant in terms of the public expenditure and the increases in services for disability, for education in terms of capitation grants, €50 for primary schools. Very significant interventions. And one has to make choices in budget. Like I can recall I think consistently the Labour Party would have criticised the government's tax packages for the last 5 years. And now, when there's not a tax package in personal income, you turn around and reverse and say, and criticise us for not including one. But we decided to invest in capital in terms of more roads, more schools, more public transport, better rail services.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
And that's what we're doing right across the board.
Deputy Bacik,
and in terms of also disability, child poverty measures, we've significantly enhanced the allocation to those respective areas.
Taoiseach, with respect, of course we welcome sustainable measures that will cut costs for families and households. But let's be clear, your recent budget represented a drop in the ocean at best for families that are hard-pressed and cannot make ends meet. And it's not just Labour, it's people around the country, Taoiseach, who are dismayed at the vast cost of the VAT cut that you chose to implement for hospitality and for hairdressing at the expense of doing other things, like indexing tax rates. Let's return to the constructive solutions we in Labour are proposing. The Agri-Food Regulator is the regulator. The Competition and Consumer Protection Commission has said it's the appropriate public body to investigate extortionate grocery prices. My colleague Deputy Nash asked the Minister for Agriculture when he would instruct the regulator to launch an investigation, and that was nearly 2 months ago. Enabling the authority to crack down on high prices would take nothing more than a statutory instrument from the Minister, but nothing has happened. And that's the kind of constructive steps, Taoiseach, that you could be taking now to show households that are struggling that you are going to offer them something, that you're seeking to crack down on rising grocery prices and tackling corporate greed. And that's simply what we're looking for you to do.
Well, I think we need to get prices down sustainably over the next number of years. That's the key target. I mean, some of the opposition's proposals would have added 2% to the inflation rate, which would have exacerbated the problem for many families out there. IMF is forecasting that amongst the euro area, Ireland will have the third lowest inflation rate between 2025 and 2026 at about 1.7%. That's what they're forecasting. So we didn't want to do anything. So if you wanted universal energy credits, for example, you would bump up inflation and you just consistently exacerbate the problem. Like, we can't keep on doing once-off packages forever. I'm sure you'd acknowledge that. So what we wanted to do was improve services, particularly in disability, which is a 20% increase in the allocation. That's important, and we've an awful more to do there in terms of respite places, residential places, and so on. The same in special education. Where we need more resources for more teachers, for more special needs assistants, for more classes for next September onwards. These are very important investments and allocation of resources. And what you're saying about the hospitality this year is about 250.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
That wouldn't index anything.
Time is up. Thank
you,
Deputy.
Indexation would be
Deputy
well over
Ruth
$1 billion.
Coppinger. Thank you, Taoiseach.
Well over $1 billion to index.
Deputy Ruth Coppinger.
I also want to obviously send my solidarity with the girl who apparently was sexually assaulted and with her family, and I hope she gets the care as well. Taoiseach, I want to ask you something related to gender-based violence as well. There was a report by Village Magazine on the Ditch yesterday that a Gardaí who was corrupt, who was violent, who was corrupt, who was violent towards his wife and another woman, was awarded a Medal of Bravery from the Gardaí in 2021. I don't know why this wasn't widely reported at the time, Taoiseach, but it's being reported now. And how is it that a disgraced Garda who had to resign from the force was brought back for a Scott Medal of Bravery, the highest medal that you can get? How seriously is gender-based violence taken when on Garda Síochána, somebody who was the state had to apologise to his wife for the abuse that she suffered, is brought back for such an award? Is it acceptable that government ministers presenting such awards wouldn't look into the background of such people, particularly a Minister for Justice who's responsible for the Gardaí, for the law and for gender-based violence? Now, Noel McMahon was a detective. The Morris Tribunal found that he planted hoax bombs and ammunition across the northwest of Ireland in the 1990s to make himself look good for catching the IRA. He bought illicit drugs and he planted them in a nightclub in Donegal and then organised Garda raids. The nightclub owner, Taoiseach, went to jail because of this. Let's not forget that. It was a miscarriage of justice. The man later got a certificate. On top of this, the detective assaulted 2 women that we know of. His own wife was a victim of years of abuse. He used his official Garda firearm to point to her head and say, "I'm going to blow your brains out." That's what she testified later on at the tribunal. Noel McMahon used his firearm against his wife, and he also faked a court safety order against her. Her children were placed into care. Taoiseach, she lost custody of her children because of the actions of this man. Can you imagine the damage that was done to them and done to her? Lawyers on behalf of the state, on behalf of the Minister for Justice in 2018, had to issue a state apology to the woman and damages as well. Now, Taoiseach, in finishing, how does a Garda, a bent copper by anyone's standards, a crooked cop, end up getting a Scott Medal of Bravery only 3 years after such a state apology? In 2021, you were Taoiseach. I don't know, were you aware of this award? But your acting Minister for Justice, Heather Humphreys, presented the award and called his acts heroic. Absolutely heroic.
Thank you, Deputy.
Should a Minister for Justice not do some due diligence? And will you revoke the award now, Taoiseach?
First of all, Deputy, I appreciate you raising what is a serious issue without question. And I read part of that report yesterday, and from what I gleaned from that, wouldn't have been, I can't say I was aware of that as Taoiseach back then, but there was a lot happening, and I don't want to be, you just asked me right now, and but having looked at the report yesterday, obviously the Gardaí must have put this individual forward for the Scott Medal of Bravery in respect of the kidnapping of Don Tidy, which, as you know, resulted in the murder of Private Kelly, and Garda recruit, who was just a recruit from Templemore, Garda Sheehan, murdered by the provisional IRA. And in fact, the murderers were subsequently lauded too by that organisation and by their political supporters, which is doesn't excuse what happened here, but that should also sometimes get mentioned and referenced. And I think we owe a tribute to Tommy Conlon and Rona McGreevy, who wrote a very honest book in relation to the kidnapping of Don Tidy and the brutal murder of a Garda and an army person. That said, I too would question, given and I don't want to talk about an individual who's not in the House, but there are factors that you've articulated in respect to the Morris Tribunal, which we're all very familiar with, and that tribunal was the catalyst for a lot of change within Garda Síochána. And some appalling acts were uncovered by the Morris Tribunal, no question about that. And the conclusions were very, very stark and grave indeed. And so, in the context of that, yes, I think it is a fair question to ask. But again, that's a matter that has happened quite a number of years ago. I think it's surfaced now, if I'm honest, because of the presidential election, if we're all honest, because it was written in such a way to target an office holder, but at the time. But there are nonetheless legitimate questions. I would accept that in terms of obviously a person is dealt with, and in terms of either a tribunal or subsequent actions to a tribunal. But then in relation to other acts of bravery that a person may have committed, separate altogether from the misdeeds that a person may have committed, is the person entitled to that award? I think that's particularly in the context of domestic violence and the horrific nature of the violence in this case, I think that's a very fair point to raise, and I certainly would have issues with that myself as well.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy.
Taoiseach, Gardaí who are corrupt, who pervert the course of justice over and over and over again, should not be awarded a Medal of Bravery for one act. There was no need. He could have been excluded from the award, and the other Gardaí could have been presented with the awards. What happened to zero tolerance for gender-based violence when the Gardaí who are meant to deal with gender-based violence are guilty of it themselves? Now, there is a high rate, unfortunately, internationally, of intimate partner violence among the police internationally and army. That's been a statistic. There's 60 cases for sexual misconduct, apparently, in the last 3 years on Garda Síochána. But Taoiseach, I would ask you, will you call in the Garda Commissioner? I know it was the former Garda Commissioner who presented this, but would you consider revoking this award and sending a message to Gardaí, to people in general, that violence against women is not acceptable? This guard should not have gotten an award. He should be in jail. Why is he not in jail? Is there no rules applying to Gardaí at all who commit crime?
Taoiseach to respond.
Well, first of all, I'm not justifying what happened. I've made that clear. And certainly, since our time on government, Minister Helen McEntee, I think, did a lot of work as Minister for Justice in respect of domestic violence and gender-based violence, it has to be said. And we've now had the establishment of CUAN and the new strategy, which I strongly supported as chair of an interdepartmental cabinet subcommittee as Taoiseach at the time. Minister O'Callaghan is continuing that and is bringing in further measures and allocating further resources to this area in terms of a zero-tolerance approach to domestic violence. We don't prosecute in this House. We do have separation of powers in respect of the criminal justice system. And it's not within my powers to revoke particular awards. But certainly it's a matter that we will reflect on it, and I'm not in a position to commit to any line of action in respect of this. I do think it's a very fair matter to raise. I think there has to be zero tolerance in respect of domestic violence and gender-based violence more generally.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Michael Fitzmaurice.
Gormagat Cancorla, I'm a small bit hoarse. Firstly, Taoiseach, I think everyone recognises that we need people coming into this country through the visa system. I think we need doctors, nurses, hospitality, all different types of workers, and I think they're welcome in this country. But illegal immigration, from what we have read last night, we need to have a conversation about it. Most politicians are afraid at the moment, as indeed are ordinary people. When you go around the country and talk to the people, the elderly person, the couple here and there, and they talk to you one-to-one. They outline the problems they see, but they all say to you, sure, what can we say, because you'll be called a racist if you open your mouth. Last night, or this morning, what we read in the paper is horrendous, and I won't go into that in detail, but the one question I do ask is, if somebody, regardless of who they are, is 6 years in the country, if 6 months ago a deportation order was issued, and the state is still paying for that accommodation, there is something seriously wrong. If we look over the last year or 18 months, unfortunately in this country, we have seen a huge upsurge in knife crime. We have seen a huge upsurge in weapons being wielded that we never saw in this country. We have seen some cultures treating women as second-class citizens, which is not acceptable. Here we go. And I am asking you, Taoiseach, in the whole immigration process, the government had said that they would process an applicant within 6 months. That has not happened. It is going on 4, 5 and 6 years. I am asking you, when will that be resolved? Our system is broken at the moment. You have admitted that we have an influx of youngsters and accommodation is very scarce. Donald Tusk has decided in Poland, because of the influx that they had, and they couldn't cope with it, to get a suspension with the blessings of Europe under the Migration Act. With the pressure that's in our system at the moment, would you consider that? Would you consider having a full debate in here without people being, put into corners, whether they're right-wing or left-wing or whatever? That needs to happen. And the fear of talking about this has to be basically got away, that we, as representatives of people right around the country, say what we are hearing on the ground. I am asking you, Taoiseach, will you do those things that I am asking?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Thank you for raising the issue in a responsible way. I want to acknowledge that in a fair way, because people are worried and people are anxious. And I think also you made a very fair point at the outset, that you're not criticising migration generally, or the fact that we now have essentially, a country and a society that has evolved with many, many people of different ethnic origins who live in the state who are now who are Irish, as shows next man is, but and we need proper tolerance and equality on that front. As you correctly said, in our hospitals, in our healthcare facilities, in our technology companies, the fact that we have absorbed and can draw on a lot of human capital has been a very important ingredient in terms of societal development and economic development, and that needs to be acknowledged. The process of us seeking asylum in the country has come under huge pressure in recent years, and particularly post-COVID-19, the numbers increased dramatically. And side by side with that, we had the war in Ukraine, which caused the displacement of about 12 million Ukrainians. We also have the weaponization of migration by Russia, when you instance Poland. So it's on the borders of Lithuania and Latvia and so on, right across Poland, Russia's weaponizing migration, sending migrants in to these countries. as part of his wider war effort. But to get back to Ireland, the most specific issue is, I agree we need a faster and firm procedure in dealing with those seeking asylum. The majority, about 60 or 70%, are adjudged to be economic migrants as opposed to seeking asylum from refuge. That's if you take some of the outcomes of the process. The IPO is processing much faster, and the accelerated cases are within the 6 months. But yes, the appeal system can take a bit longer, but the Minister is working with a set of proposals in terms of speeding up the appeal process. About 3,500 deportation orders were signed this year, compared to about 2,400 last year. Of those, about 1,600 have been confirmed as having left the country, either through voluntary departure or through deportation flights and other mechanisms. And I think overall the number seeking asylum is down this year by about 30%, maybe 38, sorry, about 38%. Now, there can be different factors responsible for that. But we do need fast, firm procedures in managing the migration issue. And that has to be consistent and it has to be sustained. It's back, this government took the decision to bring all this back within the Department of Justice, which was the correct decision in my view. And I think progress has been seen in respect of that.
Deputy Fitzmaurice.
And I would agree that there is no harm at all, and we should have a proactive debate on these matters.
Thank you, Taoiseach. I do acknowledge that the Minister for Justice, I've had a few conversations with him, and I do acknowledge that he is trying to make changes. I do acknowledge that. But the reality is that it's neither good to the person that's looking for asylum or to the state if something is dragging on for 6 years. That's the facts about it. And I do think, Taoiseach, that, 2 years ago, I chased up on how you basically identify somebody and how it's done, and were told by the Garda at the time that it was basically foolproof. It has since been proved it's not foolproof. And I think we need to make sure, in relation to identification, that we know who's coming into the country. I welcome what you have said. I welcome that we do need a debate here. I do welcome that we do need to tighten up and bring in new legislation, that this isn't dragging on for 4, 5 or 6 years, because accommodation-wise we won't be able to sort it. And on top of that, as a country, with what it will cost, we won't be able to afford it. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to say that all those seeking asylum are fingerprinted when they come into the country under the Eurodac system. And in 2024, 67% of completed appeals were rejected. And so far in 2025, more than 80% of applications have been rejected at first instance. And I accept your point that if people are here, it's neither fair to the person or to the country if the system is allowed to drag out for years and years. And that's where the focus has been in the last number of years, to tighten up and to speed up the process itself. We have more than doubled now the number of deportation orders signed over the same period last year. The specifics are 3583 orders have been signed in 2025 compared to 1792, it says here on the note I have. I thought it was a higher figure this time last year. And there's been about a 40% reduction in the numbers of people arriving here claiming asylum. But there are issues. There are issues that we need to tighten up on.
And that concludes Leaders' Questions. Thank you, Taoiseach.